Thank you very much. It's very exciting to be here. I work in Birmingham and I don't often come to Birmingham. I'm being told I have to move a little bit closer. Every time I go to a certain point I get blinded, so I'm going to stand here. I am going to speak from the human perspective now. So you've heard a little bit about the data, you've heard about the averages, but let's look at the life of real people. I am going to turn the spotlight on something called financial well-being. So I'm actually going to give you a little bit of information about the research that I do. I'm also going to be very blind by the end of today. I'm going to move over here. I'm going to tell you what I think financial well-being is, why it matters, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about how you might improve it, and that's going to be followed by a workshop to think about that a little bit more. So, what I'm going to talk about is really based on two pieces of research, both of them with quite heavy qualitative elements, so really talking to people, so finding out about their lives, especially their financial lives. One of them worked with 6 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and the other one worked with people in the UK. One of them wasn't led by Birmingham University and one of them was. So one of them was led by a university in Estonia, in fact. And it was funded by a foundation belonging to a financial services company that's based in Austria. So it was really a European project. But those of you who managed to hear, I've worked in various areas of policy and research related to people's financial matters for many years. So some of what I say will just be stuff that I've pulled from years of thinking about these things and reading about these things and forgetting about them and reading it again and thinking, wow, that's wise. Who said that? So we're going to, first of all, have a look at what policymakers are talking about. Financial well-being is actually talked about as the outcome of financial education or financial literacy. So often people will say, oh, it's just because people don't know enough. If they knew enough, then of course they'd feel better about it. They'd have financial well-being. So you get lots of definitions. The OECD, where I used to work, we evolved that definition. So it's not just about knowledge. So we recognise that people's attitudes have something to say as well. They're really important. But also the way people behave. If you don't behave in a certain way, then probably the outcomes aren't going to be exactly what you wanted. So the OECD talks about financial well-being. The United Nations and the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advocate, which is Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, she talks about financial health. So she talks about financial inclusion. She used to work in the financial services sector, and she finds that it's very important to recognise that if you provide financial services for people, you should do it still thinking about their financial health. In the UK, we have a UK strategy for financial well-being. You might not have known that, but we do. The Money and Pension Service is responsible for that. What is it? According to the Money and Pension Service, it's about feeling secure and in control. They actually summarise this as being confident and empowered. So they have this definition that they're working towards, and what I've been doing in a lot of my research is actually looking to see what people talk about. So the Money and Pension Service brought together experts, looked at existing evidence and came up with their definition. But what we wanted to do was to talk to people, this is from Europe, and find out how they describe their financial well-being. And you can't just walk up to someone and say, how's your financial well-being? Because most people say, what's that? Or if they don't say, what's that? They're at least thinking that. So we talked to them about various aspects of their life. We talked about their general well-being. We talked about their family, their first job, their first relationship. We talked to them about their pets and their home. And as the conversation evolved, and I didn't personally have these conversations, it was an agency that did that, we heard about their financial matters. And it became clear that basically people talk about security, they talk about freedom, and they talk about pleasure. And that might seem a little bit strange and a little bit hippie, who knows? But actually that's what people talk about. So they're not just thinking about their financial lives in terms of a savings account or how much money they owe to somebody. They're thinking about the freedom of choice. They're thinking about not letting their money dictate all their choices. They're talking about spontaneity and about enjoyment and about moments with their friends. Some of them, of course, don't talk about any of that. One of the things that became very clear was that there's a point at which it doesn't really make sense to talk about financial well-being. In the same way that some people are very sick, some people are really not in a position to think about well-being because they're going through survival. And unfortunately, the numbers are growing. At the moment, it's very difficult. So here we have a quote: "It becomes unpleasant when the not allowing hurts." So rather than pleasure, we're hearing about something being unpleasant. And another one: "I have such small, humble income that no one can manage it, not even an expert." I do think that was a nudge at us to say, just go away and solve some other problems because my problem's too difficult. But it's clear that for some people, this level of poverty is too strong for them to really think about their financial well-being. When they do talk about all of these financial matters, all of these money matters, they do talk about income and savings and debt for sure. They talk about affordability of purchases, all the things that we think about, the kind of classic capitalism story, I guess. But they also talk about comparing themselves with others. They talk about things like respectability, about having children's shoes that fit the children, about having more than one coat. This is especially important in some of the countries where we were interviewing, where it gets very cold and then very, very, very cold. They talk about their life balance, their relationships, their feelings of stress and of comfort. And again, you can see some quotes here, so I'll just read the bottom one. "Satisfaction also comes from not having to argue about finances." This relationship element is incredibly important to people. People also, once they started thinking about their financial well-being and talking to us about it, were able to some extent think where they might be on an imaginary scale. And some people decided they were very satisfied, very well off. We classified those as being high, based on lots of information, not just a few words. Some of them said that life was okay, that it was satisfactory, they were content, they were normal. And some of them said that it was bad. For some, below average, for some, miserable. So really people recognize that not everybody's the same, that financial well-being isn't a given, that it isn't that you just have it or you don't have it, that there's a gradation, if you like. And also what became clear was some people really wanted to change this. That's not where they wanted to be. Some of them were working incredibly hard to stay, so they were kind of paddling but not moving anywhere. Some of them sort of recognised that in an ideal world they'd do a bit more, but they weren't doing a bit more, and it might have a negative impact, and they knew that that was the reality, that things might get worse. Some of them just knew where they were and they were okay with that, and that was just them describing it to us because we'd asked them to. But what was really interesting was that some of them had decided that change was scary. So they saw people who were perhaps living more comfortably than them, that had more freedom, that had more pleasure, and they saw that as coming with additional stress. Now, that might have been them going through the thought process and trying to justify reasons why they didn't have it, or it might have been them being genuinely scared. But it was interesting how they were choosing not to change and giving themselves reasons why change might not be a good idea. So what we also see is that financial well-being is mixed with well-being. It's not exactly a component that sits far away. It's so intermingled with other aspects of our life. You can't even be healthy if you're constantly stressed about finances. You can't even eat properly if you're stressed about finances. Food, health, people talking about relationships before, these things are one and the same to many, many people. What's also clear is that our financial lives require financial service providers. It's pretty much a given. Just as we need electricity, we need water, many people have access to gas, we need phones, we also really benefit from some financial services. There's a lot of people that argue that they're as fundamental as other utilities. And when we use them, when we access them, we expect them to be fit for purpose. We take that pretty much as a given because we can't test it. Now, that might not be true with your current account where it's fairly easy to switch, but it's certainly true if you take a pension or if you buy insurance that you do not have the ability to test that product in advance. And it's not like you can open the box and look and feel a little bit disappointed and think, oh, well, I only paid £50, what did I expect? You don't have that. So you have a product and you put your trust in that product. So we also rely on a regulatory sector to look after us and to make sure that those products are appropriate. We know that when those products work, they can help support financial well-being because they provide many of the services that people talk about that are important to them. So making and receiving payments, a very obvious one. Putting money somewhere safe to look after, improving their liquidity by giving them credit when they need it, insuring them against risks that they can't manage any other way, saving for their retirement, and so on. Without access to those financial services and products, people become increasingly excluded. They're not just what we call financially excluded, but they can become excluded from forms of work. So, for example, if you can't afford to insure your car and you can't get to work, you can lose your job. But you can also be excluded from more simple things like getting a phone contract. So then how do you afford your first phone? How do you afford your second phone? It becomes a snowball of exclusion if you're not careful. As a policymaker, if you're not careful, as a human, if you're not careful, you still don't really have any choice in this matter. So yeah, we see that the impact of these aspects of our financial lives, the impact on our financial well-being, aren't just having an impact on us, but they're potentially having an impact on the society around us, that they're making it harder for people to do ordinary things. So can we improve things? Well, if we go back to the OECD and the G20, they've just written a policy note on financial well-being. See how policymakers are interested in this. And they say that financial well-being can be influenced by many policies, from fiscal to social protection policies. They also go on to say that there's an important role for financial services and for financial sector policies. And then at the end they go, but they're not going to be able to do it by themselves. So there's a little bit of a get out there in case they don't do it by themselves. But realistically, when you listen to how people talk about their lives, when you hear them talking about their money matters, you realise sufficient income, that's the key. That people can't necessarily work for their income, but they do need an income from somewhere, and it has to cover the basics. If you talk to people from Citizens Advice or people that work in other debt charities, they'll tell you, even once they've stripped people's budgets down to a minimum, there's a huge proportion of people that simply have less money coming in than is going out. The average for Citizens Advice is £36 a month. So there's £36 a month not coming in, that is going out every month. That's why people are getting into debt. Income is a huge stabiliser for people, and of course that's going to help them with their financial well-being. But also we know that work is changing. People are having to work longer. People are going to be living for 100 years. People are not going to necessarily be doing the same job from leaving school to reaching retirement. And so career guidance is going to be useful. Regular retraining, uptraining, reskilling, whatever we call it. And I put particularly for women, and that's because women still spend more time out of the employment market than men, and they're still more likely to work fewer hours, and so as a result women are still less likely to get promotion, and they're less likely to get into jobs where perhaps they've got long-term security. So it is still a gendered issue. Workplaces also have a role. Workplaces can support financial well-being. They're already the place that are giving a lot of people their most of their income, so they have a role to play. Housing policy has a role to play. Over and over again, people talked about the housing, about how inappropriate it was for them, either because it was too large and they could no longer afford to keep it going. It was too small, they couldn't fit their children in. It was too far away from their workplace and they couldn't get to work at a in a cost-effective way. Or they'd become disabled and it was no longer fit for purpose, but nobody would pay for them to have their house changed. So housing is a huge issue. Healthcare is also a huge issue. And not only is healthcare an issue, but when your financial well-being is affected, it affects your mental health. So if you are feeling stressed, if you are in a situation where your financial situation is impossible, then your mental health is much more likely to be also problematic. So you have a two-way problem going on there. But financial service providers can make something of a difference. I've already mentioned how they might be able to do something there. And crime prevention can make a difference, because how many people have been scammed? How many people are facing a situation where they're paying a loan to someone who is actually a loan shark, who is putting them under enormous pressure? So we need crime prevention. So this slide basically lists a whole load of people who should be working together to try to help financial well-being. At the moment, for the most part, they don't talk to one another, but we are about to see a little bit of change, I hope. So what about people? Well, people can have a look at the triad that I talked about, the security, freedom and pleasure. Think about that, think about how that might help, and that's what we'll do in the workshop in a little while. Start to think about whether there's a balance between how your security and your pleasure and your freedom interact. Some people spend so much time trying to save up that they don't have any pleasure in their life because they're so focused on their future, or they're so focused on their savings goals. Some people get all of their pleasure from saving, so actually their pleasure and their saving go up together. So have a think about the way in which these things go together. People can also try to stop themselves when they start making unhelpful comparisons, when they feel themselves getting that social anxiety, when they see somebody having something that they want. People can consider their family and whether helping their family is actually having a negative impact, and whether there's discussions to be had, or whether asking for help is having a negative impact, or is it having a positive impact. It's really not normative. I'm not saying this is the right way, this is the wrong way, but these are things that we've heard from talking to lots of people have helped them to reassess, to rebalance, to think about their financial lives. Similarly, different skills. We know now from looking at the research that financial education has its role, but actually the skills that people need are beyond just knowing how to calculate compound interest, which is the classic that people tell you. And you need to be able to self-advocate. You need to be able to solve problems. You need to also have some basic financial skills and understand what it is you're getting into if you take on a financial product. And at the end, you can also use the new tool that we developed as part of this research. Don't click on the link now, but maybe if you want to have a look, it's a very gentle tool, I would say. So I'm going to conclude there by saying there is widespread policy interest in financial well-being, and it's anticipated that other policies that are looking at financial inclusion or financial literacy, will actually help to improve financial well-being. That focus on financial inclusion is required because at the moment the market is not providing people with the products that they need at a price they can afford, and that's not supporting their financial well-being. And there might be things that we can do for ourselves that other people can do for themselves. So whilst I am arguing that there's a role for policy, I'm also arguing that if we really understand what underlies our financial well-being, maybe we can also be part of the solution. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.